Good evening, everyone. This is Ori Bimi Egbeyo Yintola, and I wanted to make another live video this evening about the aftermath of leaving your spiritual house. This video comes in response to I got to the last live I did where I had disclosed that in the past I've had to leave a couple of the spiritual houses that I joined, and there was an overwhelming response to the video, and then there were people who had just kind of asked me to talk about what it's like to have to leave a spiritual house and how I move forward after that. And so that's what where I'm coming from today. I'm going to do a little bit of recap. I joined my first spiritual house back in, I think it was 2015. Um, and I remember traveling to Detroit. I currently live in the Cleveland, Ohio area, and I was unable to find a spiritual house here. And I had reached out to a friend of mine and asked her godmother for a recommendation. I had told her I was interested in this particular Babalao, and she said that he was really good people, and she kind of gave me, a thumbs up. I'm going to get a reading from him, and so I went to Detroit to get the reading. I had my very first reading with him. um, One of the things that should have been a red flag for me at that time, but it was not, because I was new ish to the tradition. Most of what I had known had been researched in books and not necessarily talked to with an elder. Um, so I went to Detroit, had this reading, and he did the reading with four cowrie shells. And one of the questions I asked was, could I determine who my head Orisha was at the time? And hindsight 2020, like that is really not a first question that you ask um, when you're going for divination, and this is your first divination in Orisha practice. Like, you should not be concerned about who your head Orisha was. But like a lot of people who are new to the tradition, and in this day and age, I really, really, really wanted to know. I was kind of anxious about it. And so he asked me, was there a particular Orisha that I was drawn to? And my answer was Yemoja. Based on the research that I had done, that's just the Orisha that I had felt most closely aligned with. And so he divined, he asked, and I was told that Yemoja was my head, and that Ogun was my father or my feet. And again, to me, this should have been a red flag, but not knowing any better, I didn't know any better. One, I was looking for a traditional West African Orisha house. In traditional West African Orisha practice, they don't mark head and feet and shoulders and all of those things. Um, that is more so of a Regla de Ocha, Lukumi, Santeria practice to have head and feet. In Yoruba land, it is just your head. And also in Yoruba land, you can be initiated multiple times to multiple Orisha and not just your head. So using four cowrie shells, he marked my head as Yemoja. Again, that to me should have been a red flag. Not saying that you cannot mark somebody's head with four cowrie shells, but all of the other times that I have been told who the Orisha are that are with me, and when I actually had my head marked correctly, a Babalawo used a Pwele and marked based on Odu, not just the four cowries. So I got my head marked. I thought this was a really good reading. I came back for a couple of other readings before I decided to join the Ile. I got my Alekes. I went through a ceremony to get my warriors, which also is not a neither one of those things are a traditional West African from the way that I practice. Those are not things that are done. There is no Aleke ceremony in traditional West African Orisha practice the way that I practice it. There is no giving of warriors. And I went through all of these things. I got my things. I got my warriors in my house. I was not really given any instructions on how to handle my warriors. I wasn't given any instructions on when to pray, on how to pray, on what to do. I basically was told, here are your warriors for your first 21 days. Write down any dreams that you have. Um, I essentially had live shrines in my house, and I was not being attentive to them and giving them the things that they need, which kind of wreaked a little havoc in my life. Then I began to notice that there was havoc being wreaked in a lot of my God brothers and God sisters lives. Like everybody was just going through something. There was just a lot of turmoil. And then it came to the point where this turmoil got to my godfather. He was just having a whole lot of problems with different things. And then I realized that he was a very young Babalao. I think that he had maybe been initiated 2 or 3 years. He had not been given clearance yet by uh, his godparents to read for us with Apuele. And then when he got that clearance and he got that okay, he was still kind of nervous about doing it. And so it had came up that I needed to be initiated to Ifa. And he said to me, our lineage does not initiate women to Ifa. If you were a man, that would be no problem. However, you can Sode or be tied to Ifa. You can become an Apuetebi, becoming a wife of Ifa, but you cannot have full initiation to Ifa because that is not what our lineage does. And I said to myself, I said, if the divination said this is what I need, then this is what I need. And then I had something called a life reading where I am supposed to be told what my guardian Odu is. And I'm supposed to be told all of my taboos. And I was supposed to be told all of these things. And so I'm preparing for my life reading, and I have my notebook and I have my pen and I have my paper. And it was literally like maybe 5 sentences. Um, there wasn't a whole lot to it. And he had given me the page numbers out of the book that he took the Odu from. And he said that he would have to follow up with his elder to get more information for my life reading, but that I should prepare for initiation. And so everything in me said pause. My ancestors said pause. My Ori said pause. My intuition was just like, this is not it. Pause, 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 pause. And so I did. I put everything on pause, and I decided to get a reading from another Babylao, another elder. I went and explained my situation to another elder, and they said that, that didn't sound right. That if this indeed was my life reading, that it should have come with lots and lots and lots of information. That if I indeed needed to be initiated to Ifa, there was nothing in any other lineage that prevented me from being initiated to Ifa. And so I decided that this was no longer the spiritual house for me. Um, as I began to research other houses and I began to research more traditional lineages, I actually was able to reach out to Enifa here in Cleveland, and I had a reading with a Yoruba Babalao down in Miami. And just in that reading alone, I remember that reading being 3+ hours. And that wasn't even a life reading, that was just him sitting and reading for me. He had a friend who he considered like a brother there with him who was chanting Odu for me, like verses and verses and verses of the Odu that had came up. And I just received so much more information. And I'm like, yes, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. And so I decided that it was time for me to part ways. Now, I will say on my behalf, on my part, I may have not done it correctly because I decided to leave. No explanation, no nothing. Like this, I just disappeared. And at first, it was really hard for me because this was all that I had known. This was my spiritual family, and I felt lost. I felt without a family. I felt lied to. I felt embarrassed. I felt hurt. Um, this was the Babalao or the priest that I had put my spiritual well-being. I put that in his hands. I entrusted him with that. I entrusted him to be honest with me. I entrusted him with the safety of my spiritual well-being. And then to go and talk to other practitioners and witness how other Ilays worked, and to realize or feel like I wasn't getting everything that I thought I needed or I thought I deserved, or I felt really, really bad. And so the first thing I did was I packed up all of my warriors. I put them in a box because I was just like, well, traditional West African practice doesn't even give warriors, so why do I need these? And so I put them in a box. And then I stopped wearing my alekes. I took them off and I put them in a drawer in the dresser. And I took my ide off, and I was just like, I don't want any of this stuff. I don't want anything tied to my old Ile. But I wasn't at that point. I had not given up on the tradition. I was just like, okay, I need to find me another Ile. And as the days went on and as time went on, I started to slip into this kind of depression. Like I was just, for a while, there was just like a lot of anger towards my former Babalao. There was just a lot of anger towards the tradition. There was just anger. And after I had gotten past being angry, I was just sad. I was sad, and I felt detached, and I missed my god siblings. And I reached out to one of my former god sisters. I had reached out to her on Facebook because I kept seeing her post on Facebook, and she and I had really had like this little bond. And I reached out to her on Facebook, and I realized that she had had a similar experience and that she had left the Elay before I did, and I didn't even know that she had left. And she felt the same way. She was very jaded, she was very upset, she was very angry, she was very hurt. And so we kinda shared in that experience, and she led me to another Babalawo. And at this point, I was not ready to join another Elay, but I had been consumed by this darkness for, I would say, about 3 months. I went through just a period of spiritual darkness. I was not reading tarot, I was not using my pendulum, I was not doing anything. I felt lost. I felt like I was lost and I was wandering in the dark and I did not know what to do. And I talked to the Babalawo. It wasn't even like I wanted a reading or anything. I just talked to him and he understood. I explained my situation and he understood, and he was very upfront and honest with me about his practice. He informed me that he did practice a mix, that his father is Nigerian and his mother is Lukumi, and he was born and raised in a Lukumi house and tradition and practice. But because his father was Nigerian, he also knew, understood, and practiced West African Orisha tradition. And I said, okay. And I took that information and I sat with it for a while. And he and I just kind of became friends. And he kind of pulled me out of the darkness. I had found somebody who I could talk to and who I could kind of explain what I was going through on this spiritual journey. And he said to me, he said, regardless of what tradition you practice, you have live shrines in your house. You have warriors in your house who need to be tended to. And that could be a lot of the cause of you feeling like you're in the dark. You've put these live shrines in a box and you essentially put them in the dark, and you could be mimicking that. And so I took a trip to Atlanta and I took all of my shrines down to him so that he could see them and see if they were made correctly, and just look at everything. And that's kind of when I got an even bigger shock that hurt even more, because I found out that essentially my issue was empty. It was not made correctly. It was missing a lot of the things that made him Eshu and a live shrine in my house. And so I had to pay to get my Eshu fixed. Because there's this big thing. It's like Eshu is the messenger, Eshu is the gatekeeper. You need Eshu for everything. And so I got my Eshu fixed, but that made me feel even more betrayal. That made me feel even more anger and more upset. I still was not ready to put the Ide back on. I still was not ready to put the Elekes back on. But I knew that I had to take these shrines out of the box, and I either needed to leave these shrines with someone who would tend to them, or I had to tend to them myself, because that's just a part of the tradition. You can't say you're done and just throw everything away, or you can't say you're done and just put everything in a box, because you have living, especially if you have living, breathing shrines, You either have to continue to tend to those shrines, or you need to give those shrines back to the person who gave them to you, or have someone else tend to them, because that can negatively affect you and your life and everything, because those things are in your house, they're in your possession. And so I decided that I was going to tend to my shrines, even if I did not have a house, or that I did not have an elder I could trust. That these were my shrines, I paid for them. I worked hard for the money and I paid for them, and they were in my house, they were mine. And so I asked this Babalawo to teach me how to pray to my shrines, and how to greet my shrines, and teach me everything that I needed to tend to my shrines. And so he did just that. He offered general classes on the Orisha that were more in depth than the classes that I had previously took. He offered me one-on-one personal classes outside of the Orisha classes that he offered. Um, and I realized that he was teaching me the Lukumi way to tend to my shrines, because I had Lukumi shrines. And so it came up that in order to get out of this dark place that I was in, to get out of this predicament that I was in, that I had to pray to Eshu daily. And that meant getting up in the morning at 4 o'clock in the morning and praying to Eshu, because I would have to leave my house by 6:30, because I was a teacher at the time. I would have to leave my house at 6:30. And so Eshu can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And you can't just get up in the middle of prayer or offering. Like, you can't, until you can close, that's when you can get up. And so I would have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day and pray to Eshu. And I had to learn how to bare my soul to my shrines. Every time I would go and get a divination, it was said to me, "You're not being truthful with your shrines." And it's not that I was lying to my shrines, it's just that I wasn't telling everything. I wasn't bearing everything. I only prayed about certain things. I only talked about certain things. I wasn't talking about everything. And I had to really bear my soul, my anger and my frustration with my former Ile, my anger and my frustration with my financial situation, my anger and my frustration with the apartment that I lived in. I wanted a house. And I literally had to pray and ask Eshu every day for my house. And then it still came up that you still need this initiation that you were told that you needed last year that you still haven't done. And I'm like, Eshu, I ain't got no money for initiation. Like, I barely got money for rent and all this other stuff. And so then it was, now I got to pray to Eshu about money for initiation. And then I was just like, I'm praying for all these things, but what I really need is a leader. I need an elder that I can trust. I need a home. Like, I can't even tell you how many times I would call Tam or I would text Tam. Like, I got on Tam nerves to the point where Tam was like, "Hey, you are not in my Ile. Stop calling me." And but I needed guidance. I needed something. I felt lost and I was wandering out there. And so for a while it was just me and Eshu. And every now and then Ogun, because Ogun and Eshu, they sat next to each other in my house. And I started praying for an elder. I started praying for not just someone to teach me, but I needed another spiritual family. I got to the point that I was willing to put the E-Day back on, and I was willing to put the Alekes back on, and I was willing to give this another shot. But that took time. And that was something that I had to realize. And that is the one thing that I want to share about the aftermath of leaving a house. It takes time. You have to get past all of the feelings that you had about what happened to you. You have to go through the stages of grief, all of them, until you get to acceptance about what happened. Because there is a stage of grief. That whole 3 months of darkness that I went through, where I literally felt like I was walking blindly in the dark. That was grief, overwhelming grief of having to leave my spiritual house. And you have to go through that grief. It is okay. I'm going to say it's mandatory that you go through this grieving period. You have to get out all of those negative feelings. And if you want to continue in the religion, learn to open yourself up again. Because one of the first things that I did when I left my spiritual house was I closed myself off spiritually. I closed myself off emotionally. I was not able to trust a lot of the things that I was being told. I had different readings from different elders in a particular notebook, especially readings that are related to Orisha practice. They're all in a notebook. And I will go back and I will look and read. And even readings that I got from my very unexperienced Babalao that I had as my first elder, they all kind of say the same thing. They all have the same message. And so while I was going to all these different people because I did not trust what was being told to me, I went back after I was settled in a new house and after I had trusted again and after I had let the Orisha back in and after I had let my elders back in and realized that while the human being that we entrust do things that are not right, and while they may quote unquote fall short, the Orisha themselves will not misguide you. The Orisha themselves will not mislead you. And oftentimes, when you get in these situations, this is a part of your journey. This is a part of your path. There is something that you were meant to learn. And for me, a lot of that was discernment. I had to learn to be more discerning with who I was choosing to lead me and more discerning with the messages that were given to me. But I had to go through the period of darkness. I had to go through the trials and tribulations. I had to go through all of that to learn how to be discerning when looking for an elder to lead me. And all of that came with being patient and taking time and not rushing the process and not rushing trying to attain different levels and different statuses and different ranks and initiation. I was told that I needed to be initiated in 2015, and I did not actually get initiated until 2019. Um, because I had to go through all of these things and be discerning. And even in initiation, there was still this lesson of being patient and being discerning when choosing an elder. There is a lot of the aftermath and not trusting and not believing in the human led to me being more discerning and more patient with the process versus trying to rush the process and hurry up and get to a certain point or hurry up and get some information. Because instead of worrying about who my head Orisha was, I should have been looking out for red flags and being more focused on who the elder was that was presenting the information to me. And when I got my hand of Ifa, something came up in the reading. And one of the Babalaos who was there during my ceremony, he said to me, he said, "You don't believe," and more discerning. And I know that a lot of that stemmed from what happened with my first house, trusting someone who was not honest and upright and forthcoming with me about his practice. But again, I will say, you have to, if you're going to follow the Orisha, trust your Ori. Ori work is very, very crucial and very all of this. Head rogation is very important in all of this. When I came and I decided to take my warriors out of the box, the first things I had to do before I could get my SU fixed, before I could get anything done, one of the very first things that came up in divination was, you need a head rogation. You need several head rogations. You need to clear your head. And I will say, even if you do not have or belong to an Ile or a spiritual house, there are ways that you can clean your own head. There are elders who will do head rogations for people who are not members of their houses. But having that clear head and that clear mind and having that connection to your higher self, that is key. That is important in dealing with being separated from your spiritual house. That is key, and that is important in finding a new spiritual house if you so choose to. Having a clear head is important for any decisions that you're trying to make. And so I will always advocate for or rework. Even if you don't have a spiritual house, even if you're practicing solo, or rework is important. Even outside of the tradition, if you decide to leave the tradition altogether, whatever you choose to do and however you choose to do it, having a clear head and a clear mind is important. Being in tune and in touch with your higher self is important. That is your intuition, that is your guide. Within the tradition, your Ori is the Orisha that is always with you, that will never leave you. Your Ori is very, very important. I was talking to Tam earlier about, oh Lord, Azalea Banks, that child there. And it's like people have said that like she has Ori Baruku or a bad head. She chose a bad head. And so if you want an example of what having a bad head and not being clear in your mind and clear in your thought process and all of that. Just look at her and look at how her practice looking. Look at what's going on with her life. It's not good. Um, so you always want a clear head, even if you choose to leave Orisha practice altogether and go to something completely different. You always want to have a clear head and a clear mind when you are making those decisions. Don't make decisions while you're still angry. Uh-oh. Don't make decisions while you're still hurt. Don't make decisions while um, you're still going through the stages of grief. Make sure that your head is clear when you are making those decisions and you are making those choices because you want them to be rational choices and not emotional based choices. Um, those are my biggest things is take time to grieve. One, take time to go through the entire grieving process until you get to acceptance. Um, make sure you're operating and thinking with a clear head. And know that it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. Know that it's okay to go through this entire process. Know that it's okay to take time away from the tradition, from the religion. Know that it's okay to take your time finding another spiritual house. Do not rush that process. Know that it's okay to not be trusting. You've been hurt. And you have to build that trust up again, and that is okay for you to take your time to go through that process. If you have live shrines, if you have your warriors or any live shrines, if you make the decision after you've been initiated and all of that, and you have live shrines, if you are not going to tend to your shrines while you're going through this process, find somebody else who will, because that can make this process infinitely more difficult for you. Always protect yourself. There are, and I hate to even want to have to bring this up or think about it, but there are some very manipulative elders who will do things to people who leave. They will put you in their pot. They will throw things at you. They will try to cause wahala or confusion in your life. They will try to make it very hard for you after you leave. So, in your preparation for leaving, please, please, please protect yourself as just as a precaution. Your elder may not be that type of person, but always protect yourself and have someone, if you do not know how, do protection work for you. This was a great time to pray and ask your ancestors for extra protection. Ask them to protect you from the people and the house that you are leaving, especially if you feel like this elder is going to try to do things that are going to cause negative consequences to you. Um, but always protect yourself. And that is also why it is important to have a clear head so that you are able to receive those messages from your ancestors or receive those messages from your higher self if you are being attacked spiritually by a leader or a former leader. Um, so protection is key. And also just like I said, making sure that your shrines are taken care of. while you are taking care of yourself and while you are taking the time to make other decisions. You just don't, and believe me, the Orisha are very understanding, but those are live shrines and they have to be tended to. So if you are unwilling or unable, make arrangements for that to happen. You have to decide the best way, and having that conversation with your godparent, or like me, I ghosted again. That may or may not have been the right thing to do. I did what I felt was right for me at the time. Um, so yeah, that is really all of the advice that I have. That is my story. That is how I dealt with having to leave a spiritual house. Um, One of the things that is how I dealt with having to leave a spiritual house. Um, get past this was to write a letter to my former elder, write him a letter explaining to him how I felt. To my former elder, write him a letter explaining to him how I felt. And then also write a letter of apology for how I left. Um, and I didn't necessarily have to give it to him, but I had to write it. I physically had to write that letter. I was actually asked to do that by Obatala in a reading. I had to write that letter. Um, and so all of the coping mechanisms come into play here because, again, this is just like leaving any relationship, whether you're leaving a romantic relationship or you're leaving a friendship or you're going to estrange yourself from your family. You have to go through all of that and you have to process your grief. Um, Sometimes it is easier with talking to other people who are in the tradition and who understand everything that's going on. But I'm also an advocate for mental health care. And so that also means that if you need to go to counseling about having to leave your spiritual house, absolutely go to counseling because you have to do what is needed to take care of you. Um, so don't be afraid to go to counseling because you have ended a relationship and a very important relationship. So you may need help in processing those feelings that you feel. And I'm always an advocate for going to mental health counseling to help process and help move forward. So that is also another option. But again, that's my advice for today. Those are my suggestions. If you have any questions, if you need any help, if there's anything that I can do, if you are going through or have been through this situation, you can always find me on Twitter at Trey Moon Goddess. That's TresMoonGoddess. You can drop me a DM. Um, Ways to get in contact with me if you just need any support around this or have any questions. And my next video, hopefully, will be about the over reliance of ancestors in diasporic practices, specifically diasporic Orisha practice. That video will probably not come until after Mercury retrograde is over, because I want to be very careful about my words with that one. So y'all can catch me on Twitter, and you all have a good evening. And